The official death toll in Gaza is wrong, specifically those figures you always hear about from Gaza's Ministry of Health. Now, you may have heard this being said quite a lot. Those who have justified one of the worst crimes of our age, Israel's genocidal rampage, have relentlessly tried to undermine faith in the official death statistics by claiming they're exaggerated, they're inflated, they're invented. This atrocity denial is used to sow doubt and confusion, to reduce pressure on Western governments to cease their complicity, to stop arming Israel. But it's long been clear that the official figure, now standing at more than 46,000, as hideous as that is indeed wrong. It is in fact a drastic underestimate. That is, the scale of violent deaths caused by Israeli weapons supplied by your governments is much greater than you're actually being told. Now, a new peer-reviewed study has been published by The Lancet. That is the world's most prestigious medical journal. Now, the academics behind it work at world-leading institutions. Think Cambridge, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Yale. Their method was called three-list capture. That is, they cross-reference the official data with the Ministry of Health online survey and social media obituaries. What did they find? 64,260 violent deaths with a 95% confidence interval. That is 41% higher than the official statistics. And crucially, that was only between the 7th of October 2023 and the 30th of June 2024, 9 months. So that excludes nearly 200 days worth of death statistics since then. And every single day, the Israeli military slaughters large numbers of Palestinians. And of deaths with age and sex data available, they found 59% were women, children, and the elderly. It gets worse. This is still likely a drastic underestimate, not just because it's out of date. These figures only refer to deaths from traumatic injuries, that is, violent deaths. As the researchers say, our findings underestimate the full impact of the military operation in Gaza, as they do not account for non-trauma related deaths resulting from health service disruption, food insecurity, and inadequate water and sanitation. It's worth just absorbing that point for a minute. Take the destruction of the hospital system alone. As the United Nations report found in October 2024, Israel has perpetrated a concerted policy to destroy Gaza's healthcare system as part of a broader assault on Gaza, committing war crimes and the crime against humanity of extermination. Well, over 1,000 health workers have been killed since the genocide began, many others detained, often without charge, their loved ones not notified, kidnapped in common parlance, while all 36 hospitals in Gaza have been attacked. Most of them are no longer functional. Those remaining only semi-operational, deprived of medicines, of water, energy, of course, staff, and so on. The destruction of a territory's entire healthcare system, that alone, if that was the only thing happening, that is without considering all of the other horrors inflicted on Gaza, that alone imposes a death sentence on countless civilians. Think of thousands of cancer patients. Think diabetes, think asthma, think heart conditions, think kidney disease. Think of the 155,000 pregnant women and new mothers, of the 130 babies born every day. Think of how the destruction of a healthcare system interacts with depriving a population of their most basic fundamental needs: enough clean water, nutritious food, shelter with protection from the elements, not least in winter. Think of how it interacts with overcrowding, with lack of hygiene, with open sewerage. Think of how it interacts with the deterioration in physical health driven by the acute stress and collapsing mental well-being of having to live under apocalyptic circumstances every single day. Consider how these catastrophic circumstances, unimaginable in practice to any of us who does not have to endure them, that has now prevailed for 66 weeks. Getting worse every day. Consider that as well. This is why the most accurate measurement of the death toll is excess deaths. It's a horrible clinical terms. That is, you would have to compare the death rate since the 7th of October 2023 with what prevailed before. That was already, by the way, profoundly adverse circumstances of Gaza suffering the longest siege of our time. But we can look at precedent here. From 2015 onwards, Yemen collapsed into brutal civil war, which included Western-backed Saudi-led military intervention, which was responsible for the violent killings of countless and not counted civilians. According to UN estimates in 2020, over the space of 5 years, that war caused 233,000 deaths. But the UN noted that 131,000 of those deaths were from indirect causes, like lack of food, health services, and infrastructure. In other words, most deaths in Yemen's war were not caused by violence, not directly. They were indirectly caused by the damage inflicted on the means of survival. Indeed, the horrors in Yemen offer us some brutal context for the scale of catastrophe imposed on the people of Gaza. You'll often get, and these people, I'm just going to say it, they're very sick. They make me nauseous. Apologists for Israel's genocide play a truly disgusting game, where they discover the horrors of Yemen for one reason and one reason alone: to undermine caring about the slaughter of Palestinians. They just point to the suffering of the people of Yemen, not because they care. They absolutely do not. They think the suffering suffered, the misery that Yemenis have gone through, the death, the maiming, the hardship, that can be used to undermine the suffering of the Palestinians. They say, why aren't you talking about Yemen? Well, I mean, look, personally, I've written column after column after column. I even recorded a documentary about it in a Yemeni refugee camp. Can't even begin to imagine what someone that age to go through that amount of cruelty is just pretty. So I'm certainly not someone who would ever belittle the horrors of Yemen. I remember I went to this refugee camp and I met little kids, and they drew pictures like kids often do. But the pictures they were drawing were not of cute animals and kids playing on swings. They were of buildings on fire and corpses, bodies lying in their own blood. I know the horrors of Yemen are shocking in their own right, and it is not to belittle what Yemen has gone through, to point out that Gaza's fate has been much, much worse. It's simply to state the gravity of what Gaza has gone through. In Yemen, which was the world's worst humanitarian crisis, those 233 deaths were over the course of half a decade. To compare like and like, the violent deaths were an estimated 102,000 over 5 years. The estimated violent deaths in Gaza are 62,260 violent deaths over the space of 9 months. The absolute numbers there, in terms of an annual rate, is much worse in Gaza. But it gets so much more disturbing. The pre-war population of Yemen was about 30 million. The pre-war population of Gaza, between 2.2 million and 2.3 million, much, much lower, way under 10% of the population. So just going on the direct violent deaths, the rate of killing in Gaza is so much higher. If you went by the official death toll of Gaza, which is clearly a dramatic underestimate, it's violent deaths, that means around 2% of Gaza, or 1 in 50 Palestinians, have suffered violent deaths since the 7th of October 2023. If you go by the more accurate figures of the Lancet study, around 3% of Gaza's population suffered violent deaths in the first 9 months, which is around 1 in every 34 people living in Gaza being violently killed in the time it takes to conceive and deliver a baby. That's without having any proper, accurate idea about the number of indirect deaths, which we know from Yemen were significantly higher than the direct deaths. And Yemen as a whole did not suffer the total level of destruction that Gaza is. It's sort of terrible destruction. Not going to deny that. Horrible levels of destruction, but not apocalyptic like Gaza. And it should be noted that there were multiple parties guilty of the killings in Yemen. The Saudi-led coalition, obviously a very big contributor, but not the only one. And in Gaza, it's the Israeli state responsible for the mass slaughter. That's why a study by Israeli newspaper Haaretz, all the way back in August, found that Gaza's so-called conflict, and I say so-called conflict because it's too asymmetrical to call conflict, but for want of a better term, they found it was one of the bloodiest of the 21st century. No, they used the official death toll. That is the underestimate. And they found that, for example, 405,000 were killed in Syria's civil war over the course of 13 years, or around 2% of the population. They noted that was the same proportion as Gaza in the space of 10 months. They note, looking at Ukraine, hideous numbers, but they note a much smaller proportion over a longer time period. And indeed, despite Putin's undeniable war crimes, a large majority of those killed there are soldiers of what is a meat grinder. The Israeli state will clearly go to great lengths to prevent the world from ever knowing what it has done properly, that is, to Gaza. We rely on the work of the lions of the world's press pack, the journalists of Gaza who have suffered the biggest slaughter of media workers in human history, as they desperately try every day to show the world the scale of the depravity. We've no idea what the total death toll is in practice, the actual accurate death toll, the direct and the indirect deaths, but 3 other health experts back in July last year estimated 186,000 deaths back then in a letter to the Lancet. What we do know is this is the worst rate of killing since the Rwandan genocide of 1994. We also know there's no end in sight. How long is this going to go on for? Even if this slaughter ended like that, ended now, and the borders of Gaza were completely open to humanitarian aid, and there was a massive reconstruction effort that began immediately, even if that happened, a large number of people would still go on to die as a consequence of Israel's onslaught. And there was no prospect of any of those things happening. There may be some unknowns, but the overall picture is clear. There is no excuse for not knowing that a crime of biblical proportions is being facilitated by Western powers. No one can claim, in all honesty, they did not know, which is why this evidence is crucial, not just to hold to account Israel's leaders and the Western leaders who aided and abetted them, but everyone with power and influence who legitimized this abomination, or who did and said little of any worth when they had the opportunity. Just finally, you will see a marked increase and improvement in the content being put out. That's because I've hired a brilliant video and social media person. So these videos, and I've also hired someone, as you can see, to start professionalizing the output, make it slicker, but to expand onto TikTok, onto Instagram, Facebook, X, to reach more audiences. That's the point. And why am I doing that? Because, I'm just going to be brutal, we are heading for fascism. And one of the reasons for that is we're losing war on the internet. And unless we do something about that, we're in a lot of trouble. Well, we are in trouble. I'm going to be honest. We're in more trouble than I think we realise. And that's not to disempower people. We've got to do something about it. Now, one of the things I want is to try and, which I'll be talking about a lot more, is to try and push the idea of a social media unit which works with other people on the left, other voices that need to be heard to a mass audience, to reach particularly people who at the moment are just getting bombarded constantly with far-right propaganda on social media. And that's politicising and radicalising people in the wrong way. We've got to be there. But what I'm doing on this channel is now I'm going to start a massive expansion of the content I'm doing on all different channels. And I can only do that, of course, because I've hired actual professionals to do it. And I've hired those professionals because of you, because you allow that to happen. So you're going to see a marked improvement and increase in content. And that's thanks to your support, which has been on patreon.com/ownjazz84. If you want to help expand this operation, you're going to see a lot of stuff